Hello and welcome to the Small Agency Talk Show. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of Saga, the Small Agency Growth Alliance. And I am very happy to have with me a good friend and frequent panelist on this show, Drew McLellan of the Agency Management Institute. Welcome to the show, Drew.
Thanks, Chip. Always good to be here. Looking forward to it.
It is great to be here, and it's a Friday on a beautiful, almost fall-like day here in New Hampshire. I'm not sure how it is where you are, but it's always a good feeling, I think, in fall when you have the weekends ahead of you.
Yeah, well, and I think we just got through Labor Day weekend, so I think everybody's enjoying, a little bit of short week-itis. And so, yeah,
Right.
it's beautiful here in the Midwest, too. It's starting to cool down a little bit. And so, and the humidity is starting to, bake back a little. So this is always my favorite time of year.
Absolutely.
This is when the days get good.
And this is my favorite part of the week because I love having these conversations with all of you smart folks who have agreed to be panelists on the show. And today it feels like we're at brunch because we're going to talk about poaching, but not poached eggs. We're going to be talking about poaching employees because I know and you know that all of the agencies out there that we're working with are having a hard time hiring. They're seeing their own employees being poached by other agencies. And so this is it's something we've been talking about a lot on this show lately.
Not just other agencies, Chip. I don't know about you, but it's their own clients.
Sure.
Even if they have a no poach statement in their contracts, it's their own clients, it's brands. They're also being poached, I think, by COVID related things. I want to go work for a nonprofit. I want to change the world.
Sure.
I think there are lots of reasons why people are being poached, and it's not just what we always worry about, which is the other agencies in town.
Absolutely.
And now, by the way, it's with remote work, it's other agencies on the planet.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things where a lot of people have they realize they want to do something different. And that's something that really weighs heavily on a lot of individuals as they look back at the last 18 months and then look ahead to, the rest of their professional lives.
Right. Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of movement. And, it's not just our industry. It's all the industries are calling it, the Great Resignation. I think if you talk to anybody who owns a business today, regardless of the kind of business, everybody, look at the service industries, restaurants and hotels. Everybody's struggling to find bodies. So I guess the reassuring news is it's not us, but it still affects us. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Because as we were talking about before we went on the air, there are agencies that feel like they don't want to take on new business that they could get because they're afraid that they can't staff appropriately for it.
Yeah, I was telling you, I have two agencies that are in my inbox right now that I need to respond to, and they're struggling because there's so much opportunity. And I don't know about you, but my agencies are super busy. Biz dev is going really well for them. A lot of agencies are going to have really a great breakout year in 2021. So there's lots of opportunity, but they're so afraid that they're not going to be able to staff up fast enough to not only continue to take care of their clients, but to take care of any influx of business, that they're really considering not chasing after that business at all. Which, as you and I talked about before we went live, that's a thin line between a good decision and a bad decision. And I think that you and I are in alignment that it's not that you say no, but it's that you become much more judicious about who you say yes to.
Absolutely, because right now there's no reason that most agencies should be taking whatever comes over the transom. I mean, every time that's bad, but it's particularly bad now because you don't have to.
Right. Well, and if the other part of the equation is if you're short-staffed and you take on a lot of new business and you're taxing your team, not only do we not want our people poached, but we also don't want to wear our people out. So they start looking because there's lots of opportunity out there. And so it's not that hard for any of them to find a job if they're good. So we have to take good care of our people. Otherwise, if we overburden them, we're just exasperating the problem.
Right. All right. So let's talk for a minute about how do you protect your team from poaching from whatever the source, whether that's another agency, a client, a brand, or something else that's pulling them away. How do you think about retaining staff right now, and what advice are you giving your clients?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. Number one, I think it's having a really clear understanding about where your culture is and where your people's mental health is, and tending to those things. I think it's about being mindful of sort of how you're talking about the future of the agency. I think painting a picture, one of the things I think agency owners struggle with is they have a vision in their head of where they want their agency to go, but they're not always awesome at conveying that future to their team and how their team sort of plugs into that. And I think people want to work someplace where they see themselves growing and learning and contributing and also being rewarded for all of that. And so I think it's also about really communicating that. And I think it's also about just communicating, right? I don't know about you, but a lot of my agencies right now are struggling with hybrid schedules and work from home and back in the office. And there's a lot of like agency decisions that impact our employees' lives. And I think we have to over communicate all of that so that everyone knows there's a wide open lane for us to communicate about anything that you're concerned about, and that we're being super flexible right now as we sort of figure out what this post-pandemic work life looks like.
Right. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head that agency owners are not great at communicating that vision to their teams for a variety of different reasons. And at the same time, they're also not doing enough listening to their teams in many cases, because they're drinking out of a fire hose. The pipeline is treating them well. They've got a lot of existing business. They feel frazzled, and so they're not spending the time that they ought to be spending listening and understanding what are those concerns that their team members have. What are the things that they should be focused on in order to improve that retention?
Right. Well, and I think the part that sort of breaks my heart a little bit is I think sometimes that comes off to the employees like you don't care. And if there is a group of human beings that care about their employees, you and I know it's a small to mid-sized agency owner. They have a passion for their employees, but they're not always good at conveying that passion and that heart that they have for them. And so in their silence, assumptions get made that are often really wrong. But by the time they know about the assumption, it's when somebody's turning in their notice and it's too late.
Right. I mean, the irony is that the employees sometimes think that the owners don't care. The reality is not that as you said, not that they don't care, but they almost care too much in some cases, because owners are reluctant to make some of the hard decisions that come up in bad times, because they are so attached to their team. So it's really important that the team members understand just how much the owner cares for them and their situation, and is doing what they can to create a work environment that is conducive to not just serving clients well, but also serving the team well.
Yeah, just yesterday I interviewed a guy for our podcast that'll air in about a month, and he was talking about leadership. And one of the things that he said that I was like, oh, that is so right. He said, we as leaders need to show up more like Yoda than a superhero. And I think as agency owners, sometimes we think we have to know all the answers and be strong and confident and show no vulnerability, show no worry. And his point was that we have to sort of come alongside and teach. And part of teaching is sharing our own sort of stuff. And I think that's true anytime, but I think it's particularly true right now.
Right. Well, and the more that you share, the more that your team can help contribute to solving the challenges that you have. And it is a balancing act, right? Because you don't want to cause your team to panic, right? And make them, so if you're being transparent enough, they can feel like they're part of the solution, that they're coming along together, and it's not sort of a big divide between ownership and talent.
Yeah. But as you and I both know, when there's silence, that silence doesn't stay silent. It gets filled with assumptions. And what I've found is in most cases, the stories the employees make up in their head is far worse than the truth. And so what the owner is afraid of telling the employees would actually be better than what the employees are telling themselves or each other in that vacuum. And so I just think we have to be brave enough to be honest and transparent. And you're right. I mean, there is a fine line of, especially if you've lost a piece of business, or, one of the things that a lot of my agency owners are dealing with right now is, how do I communicate the mass transit that is happening inside my agency? Some of my agencies in the last year have lost 50% of their team through the poaching and all the other things that we're talking about. In some cases, because they wanted to join the Peace Corps or they wanted to stay home with kids. So a lot of times it wasn't about going to another agency, but nonetheless, when you're inside the shop and you see, 20 or 30 or 50% of your coworkers walking out the door, that creates a lot of fear and anxiety. And agency owners have been really struggling with how to talk about that. And, one of the things that I'm saying to them is, it's okay for you to say, I'm kind of freaked out about it too, right? It's all right to acknowledge that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there are a few different special types of poaching that I think owners have particular concerns about, and those two that I'd like to focus on. One is when a client wants to poach an employee, and the second is when a competing agency wants to poach an employee. So let's talk about those. So let's start with the client. And
Yeah.
so when Sharon Torek was on last week, we talked about some of the legal implications of employees going to clients and what contracts say about it and those kinds of things. But
Right.
if an employee comes to me and says, the client is interested in hiring me, or if the client calls you up and says, hey, I'd like to hire Sally from your agency, how should you react? What should be your steps that you take as an agency owner?
Yeah, well, as I'm sure you counsel your agency owners, you're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the reality is, especially if the client has already talked to the employee, or the employee comes to you and says, so and so's offered me a job and I'd like to take it, there are already decisions that have been made, and there are emotions tied to those decisions. So if you say, well, contractually you're not allowed to do that, you have to know that at some point in time in the next 6 months, you're going to lose both the employee and the client in most cases.
Right.
So it's really about, how do I salvage this the best that I can? It is a no-win situation for the agency. But I think that it's about having a candid conversation with the client about what that means in terms of the work that you're doing with the client. Are they thinking that by hiring Babette, they're going to take all the work in-house? Can you get them to honor their contract? There's all kinds of conversations about timing and sort of the relationship that need to happen. But in most cases, they've already decided, both the client
Right.
and the employee.
Right.
So at a certain point in time, you just have to be graceful about it. Now, some
Right.
agencies have in their contracts that if you hire one of our employees, we've in essence served as a search firm for you, and there's a fee with that.
Right.
I don't know about you, but most of my clients who have that in their contract don't actually execute against it. How about, do your clients actually charge the
No.
client the money?
No, and frankly, and a lot of the contracts will say that you can't poach my employees, period.
Right.
But it to me, if a client comes to you and wants to hire one of your employees, or an employee comes and wants to go to a client, or really anywhere else, I think you really just need to find the path forward. You shouldn't fight it. You shouldn't try to stop it. That doesn't serve any purpose. And
No.
so yours, as you've said, is to figure out what's the best outcome that you can get given the circumstances in front of you. And frankly, a client hiring an employee is not always a bad thing, right? It can sometimes be a good thing, because you then potentially have an ally within, assuming that employee was still happy with you, and this is just a great opportunity. They can be an ally for you within the client that may help the relationship last longer.
Well, right. I mean, a sort of halfway step of that, before the pandemic, we had a lot of agencies embedding employees inside their clients' offices, which was great because they got to meet all kinds of different people in different departments, and they sussed out a lot of opportunities, even outside of the marketing department, R&D, HR, things like that. So that was working great for both clients and agencies. So you could think of it in a way that is just a more permanent embedded employee if the employee is your advocate. So again, this gets back to how you handle this situation. The grace that you show in this situation does impact the long-term reality of what comes next.
Right. And it's a great reminder that you always need to be conscious of how you treat anybody, because you don't know where they're going to be 2, 3, 4 years down the road, or even a decade down the road, right? I mean, you often have the client-vendor relationship flip-flop over time. There's all sorts of things like that can happen. I've had people who end up working for people who were one time their interns. Right? You just never know what's going to happen, so you should always treat people respectfully and keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it from a holistic point of view and an altruistic point of view, which is, this is a great opportunity for Babette, and I care about her as a person, and I want her to be successful. And I think if you can tamp down your, oh my God, another employee's leaving, or your anger at being poached, which is no small task. It's easy for you and I on this to go, oh, well, let it go.
In the moment, we feel a whole lot different when it's our employee.
Both you and I have had it happen, and it feels different when it's happening to you.
Absolutely.
But if you can find the place to do that, then I think you can get to a good outcome for everyone that tees you up for the best possible long-term relationship with both Babette, the employee, and the client, and you're making the best of a bad situation. I mean, that's really what it is.
Right. So, okay, so let's talk about the second special situation, which is when they go to a competing agency, or really just any other agency, right? I think a lot of agency owners overestimate how much of a competitor most other agencies are. Most agencies don't have, true arch rivals. It happens, but it's not as common, I think, as agency owners think. But so when an employee comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to this other agency," that can really fuel some frustration, to be diplomatic about it, on the part of the agency owners. How should you be thinking about those situations?
Well, and some fear, right? So, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I think you can say, "You know what, Babette, that sounds like a great opportunity and they're a good shop. I do want to remind you of your no compete. So I'll get you a copy of that. And I want you to know that it's standard policy that we will send a copy of your no compete to your new employer to make sure that they're aware that you are bound by that agreement." Because I've had a lot of agencies. In fact, I had an extreme example of, I have an agency inside the AMI community that's super niched. And they had a key employee that was the key account person on one of their largest accounts. And she got hired by what was one of their arch rival competitors, also in the same niche. And when they said, they reminded her of her no compete, and then they sent it to the president of the other agency, which obviously they know, we all know each other. And they just said, "Hey, congratulations on hiring Babette. She's a fantastic employee. And we know that you'll enjoy having her, as we have had her on the team for X number of years. But I wanted to make sure you had a copy of her no compete. And I want you to understand that we will pursue legal action if she goes after." And the no compete was that she couldn't poach clients or employees from the shop.
Right.
And the other agency rescinded their offer.
Yeah.
Because in the interview she had promised that she could bring that client over.
Right. Well, and that's, I mean, that's one of those things that drives me nuts when someone is hiring someone for the purpose of trying to steal someone else's clients. And you as an agency owner should not be trying to do that yourself either, right? I've got no problem. I mean, I have some of my clients who will say, "I don't want to poach from any other agency because I wouldn't want to be poached." Well, no, it's fine to go hire someone from another agency as long as it's for the right reasons. If you're trying to bring them over because you expect them to bring a book of business with them, that's just straight up wrong, because even if they don't have a legal agreement, that's not the way to behave ethically as a business owner. And the other thing is, if they're willing to do that to their current employer, they'll do it to you someday too. So you don't want that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. They've shown their colors.
And honestly, the other part of that is, a lot of times they promise things that they have no control over, and they don't really have the relationship that they think they have with the client, because most clients know it's not just their key account person or their key creative or whatever. They know they have a whole team. And let's face it, changing agencies is like changing banks. It's a pain in the neck. So they have to be pretty unhappy with the current agency to make a move to a new agency. So it's more complicated than the employee thinks, number one. And number two, you as an agency owner, you want to feel good about the choices that you're making, and you don't want to put yourself or a new employee in a position where you're asking them to do something that doesn't have the integrity that you want your agency to have.
Right. And I think it's absolutely critical, as you said, that when you have an employee who's leaving, to make sure you remind them of the obligations that they've agreed to as far as non-solicitation, non-compete, non-disclosure, et cetera. Because a lot of them don't remember. Right. I mean, when you start with a new employer, you sit there and you're signing all these documents, and we all feel good. And we're like, okay, here's payroll, here's tax, here's this. Okay. You don't remember that years later. And so it's helpful to provide that to them to remind them of what their obligations are.
And they probably didn't read it when they signed it. So, I think one best practice is to have everyone re-sign confidentiality and no competes or no solicitation agreements once a year. Then they like in January, it's like every January we're renewing these documents, and whether you update them or not, I think it's a good idea just to get everybody to sign it again, so it is more top of mind. Because again, especially in this environment, your people the door is being knocked on every single day on LinkedIn. Recruiters are going crazy, scouring the world to try and find candidates. So your good employees, whether they're sharing it with you or not, your good employees are being approached. So it's a good reminder to them that they do have these obligations.
Right, and it's frankly it's good for them to be approached. If you don't have employees being approached by other people, you
Right.
probably don't have as much talent as you think you do, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah, it's a
presumably,
double-edged sword, right? Yeah.
exactly, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
When I hear an agency owner say, "Well, I've all of my employees have been with me for at least 10 years." Well, why is that, right? I mean that's
Right.
a bit abnormal. Maybe you've created the ideal environment, but more
Right.
likely it's that they're somewhat complacent because most people are being sought after by
Yeah.
someone.
Yes.
And I think one of the things when you have an employee who's poached, you need to sit there and ask yourself why. Why did this employee decide to leave? And a lot of times for small agencies, particularly if they're moving to another agency, it's because you didn't have a path forward for that individual to grow. And
Right.
you and I both know that particularly millennials, they want to see some sort of a growth path, both in learning and promotion and all that kind of stuff. And
Yep.
so you need to be thinking about, can you provide those opportunities? And if not, then you have to be okay with them moving somewhere else to get those opportunities.
Well, I have a couple agencies that they know that they're a 3 to 5 year destination for most of their employees, and
Mhm.
and they hire with that in mind. They talk about it, and a subset of their employees have stayed longer, but they know that that's about what they're going to get from somebody because they are small and because they don't have as much title and opportunity to grow. But I also think a lot of agency owners think it's the employee's job to carve out the career path. And especially the millennials, I would say people 35 and younger, they're looking at their boss and saying, what's my path? And
Right.
so you can either get grumpy about having to do that work and have them leave because you didn't give them a path, or you can be smart and create a path for them. And the upside of that is with the path comes learning and growth and responsibility on their end to be ready for the next step. Well, don't we always want our employees to be getting better? So
Right.
in my mind, it's sort of a no-brainer to have career paths for your people because it comes with a learning path as well that you can hold them accountable for. And I always say, look, that's probably the greatest indicator of the value of this employee long-term is, do they embrace this idea that they have to keep learning and growing? And if they do and they're hungry for it, man, that's an employee you want to invest in. And that's an employee you want to not just invest money in, but time and energy into. And if somebody is like, yeah, I didn't get to my growth goal this quarter, I'm too busy, over and over and over again, that's somebody who thinks about this as a job. And
Right.
so you need to think about them as an employee that is not ready to give 110 or 120% to keep getting better. And again, then you know how much to invest in them. So I think it's a great indicator of,
Yeah.
every employee is not created equal.
Well, and I think that, when you think about how you protect against poaching, I think one of the key ways to do some of what you were just talking about is the annual performance review. And I think most
Yes.
agencies misuse the annual, and not just agencies, I mean, employers of all sorts
Right.
misuse performance
Yeah.
reviews because they are generally used, okay, here are the things that you need to work on to improve. And, maybe I'll tell you a few good things and I'll tell you what your
Yeah.
bonus is. And,
Right.
and first of all, I always advocate keep the bonus conversation separate from the performance conversation.
Salary
The-
and bonus should go separate. I agree. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
The finances are different from the overall
Yeah.
performance, but part of the
Absolutely.
performance is helping to coach the employee and understand where they want to be and help them understand how they can get there. And that may be working for you. It may be working somewhere else.
Right. Right.
It doesn't matter. You need to be listening to understand that and figure out how you fit into that puzzle if you
Yeah.
want to get the most from that team member.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I advocate about a third of the review is looking backwards, but 2/3 of the review is looking forward. And
Absolutely.
it's talking about, and if you're doing one-on-ones through the year, you can do a lot of that looking backward or dealing with things in real time so that you don't
Absolutely.
really have a lot to talk about in the annual review that is in the rearview mirror. It's really about the future, where they want to go. And I believe it should be a mix of not only where do you want to go professionally, but like what life do you want to have for yourself and how can we at the agency support that life? There's a great book called The Dream Manager, Michael Kelly, I think it's Matthew Kelly. And it's all about the power that comes from leaders understanding what their employees want, not out of just their job, but how the job supports their life. And if the more you can help them accomplish those goals, those are the kind of things that make poaching, make the poachers go, the employees say to the poacher, no, thank you. I work at a place that is helping me get my first mortgage, or cares about the
Right.
fact that we want to adopt a baby, or cares about the fact that I want to move my parents, whatever it is. These are people who are invested not just in my professional life, but in my life. And
Right.
I think that's a unique opportunity we have as small to mid-sized employers. We have a reasonable subset of employees in terms of numbers that we can care that much about them, and we can be that invested in them. And I think that's when they stay.
Right. And I love that you mentioned one-on-ones. Regular listeners know that I'm a broken record. I believe that one-on-ones are the most powerful tool we have as agency owners to drive individual team member performance, but also overall agency performance. It's
Agreed.
that opportunity to be listening, to be providing real-time feedback, because your performance, nothing should be a surprise in the performance review, right? You should never get to a performance review and have someone be blindsided by that. Nor should you really be blindsided when someone comes to you and says they're going to leave, because you should have been picking this up in the conversations, and you just simply realized you didn't have the opportunity to provide, and you're okay with that because, people have to grow, and it's not always growing with you.
Well, and again, the one-on-ones give you the chance to, one of the things agency owners tell me about the one-on-ones is they learn so much more quickly, early on, like it's an early detector system of problems with clients, problems inside the shop. Because when an employee knows they have your ear on a regular basis and you're actually listening, not talking, which is one of the challenges, they're ready to share, but they just need the forum to do it. So yeah, I too am a huge advocate of them. Done well, they are an agency owners or a department heads, whoever the direct report is, they are a secret weapon for you to know everything that's going on inside that employee's head. So you can course correct early on, long before they show up with a resignation letter.
Right. And it's one of those things where small agencies in particular they don't do the one-on-ones regularly enough because they're like, we're a small team. We're talking to each other multiple times a day. We're on Slack. We're on Zoom all the time. We're seeing each other 5-6 times a week in those various forums. And so they think they don't need to have those special one-on-one, separate from everything else kind of meetings, and you can't give those up. They're so important because people will raise things to you in those meetings that they won't call a separate meeting for, that they won't share in front of the rest of the team. And so you need to make sure that you've got that, and that will probably help with your poaching problem more than anything else.
Well, honestly, all the conversations we have through the day, regardless of channel, are pretty functional. It's like we're getting the work done conversations. A one-on-one is stepping back and looking a little bigger picture and talking, not philosophically, but about sort of thematically what's going on with the employee, with the clients, whatever. It shouldn't be a traffic meeting. It shouldn't be about projects and what's going on. It really is bigger picture than that. And there's no other place that automatically says to the employee, this is a safe place to talk about these kinds of things.
Right. And it has to be employee driven. They have to be the one that is pushing that agenda forward. Doesn't mean you can't ask your questions too, and you know that there aren't things that you might want to address or share, but they really have to be the ones that are driving the majority of the content in that meeting, because what that will do is it will help you figure out things about them, about your clients, about coworkers, things you wouldn't have otherwise thought to ask. They will share with you if given the opportunity.
Yeah, and the hardest part for agency owners, I think there are two things that make one-on-ones challenging. Number one, everyone's so busy, and this feels like a luxury meeting rather than a necessity meeting. So agency owners don't make time for it. And number two, it's hard for us to be quiet and to just listen. And so it really does.
I don't know what you're talking about, Drew. I hate talking.
Okay, not you and I, Chip, but other agency owners. But we're so used to being in front of the room, talking, teaching, sharing. It is a new skill set for a lot of agency owners, really to listen and listen actively and ask great questions. And the best, most successful agency owners I know, quite honestly, are the ones that are the great listeners. And when they ask a question, somebody goes, "Oh, I've never been asked that before." That's a great business owner right there.
Right. And if you make the time for one-on-ones, you will actually save yourself time over the long run. So just do them. And speaking of time, we're out of time, Drew. We've managed to just, keep on talking somehow, even though we hate it so much. We can't bring ourselves to talk. But
I do it for you, Chip.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you coming out of your shell just for me and just for our listeners on this show.
Yep.
So, Drew, if someone wants to learn more about you, where should they go?
Oh, I think the hub is agencymanagementinstitute.com. I'm certainly on all the social channels, but that's the way you can find the podcast and the workshops and all the other stuff we do. So, and I'm super easy to get a hold of on LinkedIn and all the other social channels. So I'm happy to hear from anybody. And obviously, if I can be helpful, we're all about being helpful.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you being helpful to the audience today. If you're interested in learning more about the Small Agency Growth Alliance saga, you can go to small-agency-growth.com. And of course, if you want to see replays of any of our shows or podcasts or other videos, just go to smallagency.tv. And finally, a quick plug for the new and improved Saga community. Just go to thesagacommunity.com and you can join with other agency owners to talk about what challenges and opportunities lie in front of you. And with that, that will draw to a close this week's episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. We'll be back with you, back with another show next week to talk about, I don't know what, because we figure that out at the last minute, because that's the most fun way to come up with topics. So
Right.
on that note, thanks, Drew. Have a great weekend, and have a great week,
Thanks,
everybody.
Chip. Thanks.